Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 469, the top 5 games that I have ever bought.
Welcome, citizens, to Meeple Nation. Grab your favorite beverage, pull up a chair, warm up those dice, and join us at the game table as we discuss board games and the board gaming world. Each week, the hosts of Meeple Nation share their love for board games and the amazing memories that come from playing games with some very outstanding people. Let us now join our hosts in their natural habitat, the game table.
We are the hosts of Meeple Nation. I'm Nathan Howard.
I'm Dave Holliday.
I'm Logan Howard.
I'm Andy Holliday.
And I'm Douglas Stewart.
The Meeple Nation podcast is sponsored by GameToppersLLC.com. You hear us every week brag about Andy's Mycrofts or about Nathan's Watsons. Maybe not as much as the Mycroft. Either way, whether you have one of those or you have the Moriarty, or maybe you're more of a Holmes guy, GameToppersLLC.com is the place to go if you really want to make your game space amazing. If you want to enhance every game that you play, go to GameToppersLLC.com. Grab a topper, grab a mat. Maybe you need some accessories for your topper. You will find it at GameToppersLLC.com, and you won't be disappointed.
We are your hosts of Meeple Nation. I am Logan Howard.
I am Andy Holliday.
I'm Douglas Stewart.
I'm Nathan Howard.
And I'm Dave Holliday.
And together, we are
Here to pump you up.
Captain Meeple!
I don't even know which one that makes me. I guess this audience actually remembers who Captain Planet is too, so I'm so torn with this reference.
Nathan is definitely heart,
There's no doubt.
and Andy is fire.
Yeah!
If you want to hear more of our digressions about various pop culture things like Captain Planet, you should check out our website and our blogs. Spoiler alert, I don't think anybody has written a blog about Captain Planet, but they could. And the only way you'll find out is if you go there. We have our Instagram pictures, links to our Patreon, which we absolutely love our patrons. Thoroughly love all the feedback we get.
This week, we are talking about our top 5 games that we have purchased. And these differ from our top 5 all-time games in the fact that we are just really excited about these games. So not necessarily the top 5 games ever, the top 5 games we've purchased. Let's start out with Nathan.
I want to break that down just a little bit, because when I first saw that you had thrown the show notes out for this, Nathan, I was kind of thinking that. I was just like, well, what's the difference between this and my top 5? And then as I was thinking about it a bit more, and I was thinking about games that I was excited to own and had a good time purchasing, and I kind of made those lists, there was no crossover. There's no crossover between my top games and my top games that I had, purchased. And I think part of the reason why is there are some games that even though they're not the best games out there, they just have such a prominent place on my shelf.
Such a presence.
Yeah. And I take such pride in the fact that I own them and can bust them out when I want to, and that they sit on my shelf. And so, yeah, I thought that this was kind of fun, because at first I was like, well, there's no difference between this and our top 5. Why would we do this? And then as I thought about it a little bit more, I was like, no, this is awesome.
Yeah, when I compiled my list, I started off with a very large list. I had 25 games on each list. And then as I debated and thought about it, as I pondered and considered which were my top games, when I got to the top 10, yeah, there was no duplication there either. In the top 20, there was some duplication. In my purchase games is an old game that used to be my number 1 game, but it's on this list for an entirely different reason. I was very surprised too that the lists were so diverse.
It's a little different for me because I have not purchased very many games. Most of the games that I play are games that all of y'all own. And so my top games and my top 5 purchase games are definitely different.
Mine are the same.
Good job, Logan.
You're welcome. I mean, I've thought about it, and it's because they're all my top 5 favorite games for the unique reasons that they are. And so those are the ones that I'm most happy that I purchased. And it's also because, like what we talked about in last week's episode a little bit too, when Andy and I were talking about some of the Lucky Duck games, is that they're games he really enjoys, but not necessarily ones he would purchase. And I like that diversity.
All right, Nathan, start us at number 5, if you would.
My number 5 is a beautiful little game called Project L. You're placing these polyomino shapes into these outlays, and completing the puzzles. And as you do, you're going to gain more pieces, which will allow you to fill up more puzzles and expand. But the reason this is on my glad I bought this game is, one, the company kind of went under, so it's more of a rare game. But mostly, this game is just so beautiful. The pieces are nice. They're hard plastic. They're shiny. They just feel nice. The puzzle pieces are the nice double-layered cardboard so that they fit in there very nicely. And this is just a game that is very readily taught and played by everybody I've taught it to. Andy, you and my wife played this after the Super Bowl several weeks back. Just a superb game, in my opinion. And so Project L is my number 5. I am super glad that I bought that game.
For me, number 5 is a game called Alien Artifacts. How many of you guys have played Alien Artifacts? That's kind of what I was guessing. So this game came out in 2017 at my first SaltCon. It was a game that I checked out, and we kind of got halfway through a play, and that was as far as we were able to get because we had to, I don't remember what it was. We had to go do something else. It was a game that I wanted to explore more. As I mentioned before, I don't really buy very many games. My budget doesn't allow it. I have a lot of people like you guys that have a bunch of games. So when I buy a game, I am looking for games that hopefully nobody else has to add something new to the mix. And I was given a gift card, which normally when I'm given a gift card for Christmas or whatever it is, it goes for groceries or it goes for something for my kids or whatever. But they specifically said, this needs to be something for you. Don't do this, don't do this. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to try and keep to that. And so I set out to buy a couple of games. This was one of them. And it's a pretty fun game. And it's definitely one that I think would be fun to work to try with everybody here.
Yeah, you should definitely teach that one to us sometime. I'd like to check it out.
So number 5, Chronicles of Crime. It was one of those purchases that, like, I loved the concept on Kickstarter. And I think it's one of those rare games on Kickstarter that it lived up to its hype when I bought it. Because there's quite a few games. You get the initial, wow, that looks really interesting. And then you get it home and it's just kind of like, why was I interested? I mean, this was like 2 years ago. Like, okay. And then it just sits on the shelf because there's much better games to play at that point. It's been on the shelf for too long for being such a great game.
Well, my number 5 was one of my first Kickstarters, which could have been why it made the list, partially. But I had kickstarted quite a few games my first year of actually getting into Kickstarter, and this is one that I was just so antsy to get. It is Merchant's Cove. I was excited about the asymmetry of the game, where everybody's playing their own mini game on their board, trying to create goods to sell at the market on the main game board. And it was just very intriguing to me. I think just the level of excitement that I had with my purchase and the anticipation of getting that Kickstarter was easily why it made my top 5. And it's a great game to boot, right? It didn't disappoint me. I loved it. And I can't wait for the next expansion that was Kickstarted last year to come out.
Yeah, this is a game that really shines with all of those little mini games that it lets people play. And every time we have gotten it out, I have enjoyed the play and then thought to myself, I want to try them all. And so we need to get this to the table more often so that we can play all those little mini games, because I really do want to try it more. This is a good one.
Yeah, we need to get all those played before the new expansion comes out.
I love the variety that's in this game with the asymmetrical powers of each of the, they're not necessarily factions, but each of the characters that you're playing. I love how each of them is a very unique play style, but all those unique play styles come together in a cohesive game, and it all makes sense. Such a diverse variety of asymmetrical powers, and to have all of those come together, you really have to understand how different these asymmetrical powers are, because it's not like in other games, well, I have a different bonus if I do this, or I have a different bonus if I do that. Each person is playing essentially a different game, but all those different games tie into one metagame.
My number 5 just happens to be Mr. Nathan Howard's favorite game of all time, and that is Star Wars Imperial Assault. Back in the day, many years ago, when I was first kind of getting into games, Imperial Assault, the core box, was the first big box game that I ever purchased. Up until that point, I'd just been buying the smaller stuff, things like Pandemic and Ticket to Ride and games of that ilk. So this was one that I kind of rolled the dice on. This was also, at the time, incredibly expensive, right? I couldn't believe I was going to spend almost $100 on a board game. You know, I mean,
those pre-Kickstarter days.
Yeah, those pre-Kickstarter days. I had not been introduced to Kickstarter yet, but I pulled the trigger on it. And I remember watching the tracking and just thinking, okay, this is going to be good. And I remember I was kind of intimidated to sit down with the rule book and everything. But once it arrived, I was blown away by what this game had to offer. And I poured over the rule books and I watched a bunch of videos. And then me and the group of guys that I was playing with at the time, we busted this out and we played 2 of the campaigns back to back. So we were playing through Imperial Assault. And before we had finished that campaign, I had ordered Return to Hoth, as well as a few others, because that you get into it. And but we played Imperial Assault, that sort of core box campaign is, and then we played the Return to Hoth campaign kind of back to back. And boy, that just kind of launched me into a whole new level of games and introduced me to a whole new level of game style that I didn't really even know existed at the time. And so it'll always be one of my favorite games that I ever purchased, was pulling the trigger on Star Wars Imperial Assault.
I approve of this ad.
On to number 4, Nathan.
Number 4 is a game that I have purchased more than once in its different renditions. I have played it a number of times. I never get bored with this game, and that game is Galaxy Trucker. Galaxy Trucker is a game where you're building your starship out of spare pieces that you find in the junkyard, and then you're going to compete in a race against other players, and you're going to hopefully get your ship to the finish line in the most complete state, because chances are your ship is going to be beat up, broken up, fallen apart, and you're going to be limping, hopefully at least with resources, to that finish line. There's the big box that has everything that comes with it, all the expansions, and then I've purchased all the expansions as they came out. Galaxy Trucker is a very fun game to just play and experience. And have any of you guys played this game?
Yes, I love it. In fact, as soon as you started talking about it, I was going, yeah, this is one we definitely need to play again. I haven't played it since before I moved to Washington.
It's been a couple years, but I remember playing it.
Yeah, it's a great game. And Doug, Andy,
I have yet to experience this one, so I'm excited. If you like it and are willing to teach it, I'd love to play it sometime.
Yeah,
I haven't played it either.
It's great. You go through 3 races and you build a ship in each race, and hopefully you survive.
It's a good one.
Good one?
Yep. For me, number 4 is Puerto Rico. This game is my wife's favorite game of all time. I believe, I can't even remember for sure, but I think the version we own is actually in German, because at that point, that was the only way we could really get it. So it's probably the first game that I bought in my big boy days. And I bought it because my wife loved it. So I love the game as well, but this was a purchase for her essentially. And so for me, it's just it's one of those games. It's kind of a throwback, but also it continues to please my wife, and that makes me happy.
This is a game we got to introduce Doug to as well.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, when I first joined the group, this was one of the first games we played, and I loved it. It was great.
My number 4 is a game I've never played. And
way to go, Dave.
It is Kingdom Rush. And this is the game I bought from Doug, which introduced Doug to the group.
Yes.
Which is why it's my number 4.
This was my honorable mention number 6, Kingdom Rush, a game we've never played, but the game that brought us all together. Thank you, Andy. This is a very nice pick. I had backed this game on Kickstarter. It showed up in the mail. We played it once with our group. And honestly, I actually think that it's a pretty good game. I enjoyed it. It did not hit with my group. So it went on the coal pile, and I was selling some games, and it was in the parking lot at the local Walgreens where Andy and I's eyes first met. And it was...
Love at true sight, or love at first sight.
It was love at first sight. No, we just got talking about games there in the parking lot, and he mentioned the podcast, and I was like, oh my goodness, Meeple Nation. I love Meeple Nation. You guys are awesome. And so I kind of invited myself to a game night, and the rest is history.
I almost feel like we should bronze the game and put it at the top shelf of somebody's game room.
This is next to Seafall.
No, not next to Seafall. But I do like the idea of bronzing the game. That's yes, I approve.
Because, it's going to get played just as much anyway.
We really should actually get that out.
I would love to. I would love to get it out.
It's a decent game. It really actually is.
So my number 4 is Destinies. And again, it's the same reason for Chronicles of Crime, is that the uniqueness of the game is what really drew me to it. And so that's why it's still one of my favorite purchases. And I don't know, maybe I should say that most of these games I've bought for myself also reach a status because I actually take them home. Because I back games like Dark Tower, and it's a great game, and it lives at Andy's house. So it's really Andy's game.
Solomon Kane.
Oh, I actually took that home because
Not
I was
all of it.
supposed to read the rules for Bryce Con, and I read the rules, and we never played.
You did?
I read the. I
After
did
you
my homework.
confirmed, after
didn't
you
know that you
confirmed, I'm
did.
only going to read these if we're going to play this.
I read the rules.
I didn't realize you read the rules.
You got to tell us so we can actually play it.
I mean, it was
You
also
hadn't played
with the
Skyrim
13
for 9 hours.
Yeah, 13 hours.
13 hours. Goodness. So glad I didn't play that.
You missed out.
No, I did not.
All right, Doug, tell us your number 4.
My number 4 is one that I kind of rolled the dice on. For a long time, I had heard about this little game called Zombicide that people were kind of polarized on. You know, some members of the community really liked it. Others, you know, it was kind of one of those dirty CMON games, just a bunch of mindless zombie plastic. I just kind of heard so many things one way or the other. So when they launched the second edition and said that they had kind of combined the rules and really streamlined the system and done all this stuff, I was like, okay, I'll go ahead and back this game. This, of course, was way after Imperial Assault when I was used to dropping more money on games. But I went ahead and backed it. It showed up in the mail. We got it out, and we had such a fun time playing this game. This game I put on this list really for 2 reasons. Number 1, it almost always leads to some really fun laughs at the table. And especially if you are playing as the presidents, because I got that pack where you can play as the presidents of the United States. And I have played that on a number of occasions now, and it is just nonstop laughs at the table. The other reason why I put this on my list is because I think I've created a monster with Andy, who now owns more Zombicide than I do. I think I created an addict over there.
This was so close to making my list. You have no idea how close this was to making my list. And it got bumped off by Kingdom Rush. So that should make you feel really good, Doug.
It really does. And that's a worthy game to bump. Zombicide. We just have such a great time playing it, and every time I see it on the shelf, I'm just like, man, I am so glad I bought that game.
Yeah, I'm not into zombies really at all. But after we played that first time at your house, I knew it was going to be on my shelf.
That's awesome.
It was such a great experience. I thoroughly loved that game, and you were spot on that playing with the President's expansion. It doesn't matter who your favorite president is or isn't. Just playing with any of those was fantastic.
Do they have all of them?
No.
No, but
So the Calvin Coolidge isn't in there.
No, Calvin Coolidge isn't
No,
in
he's
there.
not. You can play as Lincoln, Trump, Barack Obama,
Reagan.
Ronald's
Clinton.
Reagan,
and I think one of the Bush.
George Bush,
It's fine.
And Clinton.
and Clinton.
and Bill
That's
Clinton.
right. There's 6
yeah.
of them. That's right.
Yeah, it was W and Clinton.
That's right. Anyway, I can't imagine my game shelf without Zombicide Second Edition. That's why it had to make the list.
Nate.
So my number 3, we're at number 3 already. My number 3 is a game that we've played a ton of, and that is Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven is a game that I've enjoyed, and I think all of us have enjoyed very much. It's kind of dropped down the priority of games that we play. With Frosthaven on the shelf now, that's going to probably have more of a hankering to hit than finishing Gloomhaven. But just the experience that we've had with Gloomhaven makes me not regret this purchase at all. And I'm very glad that I picked up a copy of Gloomhaven. And I'm very glad that Andy picked up a copy of Gloomhaven. I'm very glad Doug picked up a copy of Gloomhaven. And I'm very glad that Logan didn't pick up a copy of Gloomhaven. And we all know Dave wouldn't have anyway.
Gloomhaven is definitely better when I'm included.
Yeah, most every game is, right? Gloomhaven's my number 3. And it is a well-deserved position for that game.
Dave, what's your number 3?
I chose a game called Grand Austria Hotel. And I chose this one because several years ago, my wife and I were on a trip to the Washington coast to visit our son who was incarcerated there. There's just this tiny little town called Long Beach, Washington. We were just out for a walk around the 2 blocks of the town or something like that. And there was a game store, which I thought was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. And so I was like, well, let's go in. And we walked in, and there was this one shelf that had a bunch of games that were like 60 and 70% off. And this was one of them. And so I looked at several of them, and this is the one that I was like, yeah, I think that's the one I would lean toward most. Picked it up, took it home, played it, and it was a really good game. Played it a few times, and it's been fun every time. It's a good one. But mostly I put it on there just because of the I guess the story of the purchase, right? Like, we're out here in the middle of nowhere, and there's a game store. It was strange.
Logan, what was your number 3?
Oh, my number 3, Call to Adventure. I think the unique thing that caught me with Call to Adventure was not the tableau building, but the throwing of the runes. when you do skill tests because, I don't know, I play games with a lot of people that always claim that some sort of dice hate them. And so a two-sided rune can only hate you so much, right?
Two-sided runes hate me.
It just doesn't roll off the tongue.
You're right, it doesn't. Even if it is true.
But I mean, it's such a unique system. I think that's a fantastic draw to me. It's just something unique like that.
Yeah, and I like how you can control, depending on which cards you get right and which challenges you go for, it will dictate which runes you can cast when you attempt another challenge of that type. We've played a fair bit of this over the last year or so, and it's a game that when I first played it, it was okay. It has definitely grown on me, especially as more content has come out and we've been doing more of the campaign stuff with it. I've gotten to where I really, really like playing this.
I'm sure it also helped when you won a free copy.
That did help, yeah. Although I think I've only played my copy once.
I really like the call to adventure system. I just think it's a good system. The way that you build your character out, the way you toss the runes. And it's hard not to mention this game without bringing up the artwork, because the artwork for every version of this that's out there is truly outstanding. It is some of the best artwork in board games, in my opinion.
With their last Kickstarter, I purchased just the art cards.
Yeah,
because
I did as well.
They're supposed to be aids for Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't think I've used them, and I think I really need to just go through the cards for our next Pathfinder night and have some of those as reference, because as you said, they are truly gorgeous.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on when you said, Logan, that the runes are such a unique part of this game. For me, I think that is probably one of the biggest highlights too, is the collecting and shaking and throwing those runes.
Well, that leads me to my number 3, which is the Quacks of Quedlinburg. And I put this on my list at number 3 just for the mileage we've gotten out of this game. For a long time, it was my daughter Amara's favorite game. I mean, hands down. It was every time we sat at the table, it's, hey, let's play Quacks of Quedlinburg. It has gotten to the point which I'm sure many who have the Quacks of Quedlinburg have experienced is your cardboard chips tend to wear out, in particular the white cherry bombs. And we've ended up getting the upgraded, the resin chips from BGG. And oh my goodness, one of the best game upgrades I've ever purchased. But it is one that is very easy to teach, very easy to learn. It's one of the first games we taught my mom when she started coming to play games with us on Mondays. I have just gotten so much traction out of this. It was such a good purchase. Even to this day, it's one that I don't mind getting out and playing. It's really fun. And the expansions, it's one of those games where the expansions, I feel, very much add to the gaming experience and to the enjoyment of the game.
So I've never seen a game hate somebody in an actual sense that's believable, except for when Richie plays Quacks of Quedlinburg.
That is so true.
Because, I mean, like, everybody can say, oh, D6 hate me. And, like, sometimes they do, but, oh my gosh.
Are you mocking me?
Yes, 100%.
I am so hurt.
But
D6 hate me.
Quacks literally, his nemesis is Richie. I don't know what it is. He'll just sit down, and then it's just like, I just exploded, and it's my third chip. And I'm like, how? There's not that many numbers. He's like, I don't know. I just did.
Yeah, he could probably sit there and the chips would jump out of his bag without reaching in. Now, Quacks it's another game that hovers around my top 5 games. So I don't know where it is because I don't have the time to really decide, but it's there.
It almost made my top 5 because it is a great game. And you talk about that chip upgrade. At this last time we were at BGG Con about the bin upgrade, and that was also a huge upgrade for that game. I would almost recommend both of those as a required upgrade for that game.
Yeah, because of the fact that those chips can get kind of everywhere, and you have the 1, 2, and 4 value chips, and they get mixed up. So yes, I got the same upgrade, Nathan, and it has made a huge difference in cleanup, for one,
and
setup, and just not having to dig through to try to find the right chip that you just purchased. So yes, absolutely, that was a wonderful upgrade and a wonderful addition.
My number 3 is a little game called Etherfields. This one sits on this list in particular for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was the very first Kickstarter that I backed. So it was the first taste that sucked me into the whole Kickstarter world. And so as such, we'll always kind of have that special place in my heart as being that first game that I took the plunge and took the risk and decided to back on Kickstarter. Also, once the game fulfilled, it set up on a table down in my basement for almost a year while I made my way through the core box campaign. And the core box, it technically has 2 campaigns. The first one is much longer than the second one is, but I played through all of the content that core box came with, and it took a fair bit of time. I enjoyed every single minute of it. It was one of my favorite experiences I don't actually really like to play games solo. I don't like to play a lot of solo games, but this was one that I looked forward to every time I had a spare second to slip down and play another mission in Etherfields.
Etherfields has a great table presence, for sure. The art on it is amazing. There's many a game that I have played solo. I used to do it to meet my 10 for 10 goals sometimes, which was kind of depressing. But through that process, I've actually discovered that I enjoy playing several games solo. That's great for some of these campaign games to get through them and be able to experience those. Like you went through Oathsworn, you went through Etherfields. Playing games solo was something that was like, oh, that takes away all the fun. That's not my opinion anymore. I think that's totally viable.
Yeah, not all games work that way, but there are some that really hit. In particular, if they have strong narrative elements, which Etherfields does. I loved the story. I loved what it was trying to do as it was creating sort of this dream world, and you were on kind of this dream crawl, right, as opposed to a dungeon crawl. And the way it sort of taxed your emotional intelligence and the decision making that you had to make, I thought was just really, really good. And I was excited. Late last year, I got the second wave stuff, so the additional campaigns fulfilled. They came in the mail. And I'm looking forward to having that set up on a table in my basement for another year so I can get through that content, which I'm sure is how long it'll take. But Etherfield's a really special game. My first Kickstarter. Can't imagine my game shelf without it.
I have a better idea. We could set it up on a table where all of us can get through the campaigns together.
I like that idea more. I do. If we can make that happen, that's my preference.
For sure. All right. We've reached the top two.
The top two. Number 2. My number 2 is a game called Big Trouble in Little China. This is a game that I really wanted to be good, and I was nervous when I bought it, but I was not disappointed. It looks good. The miniatures are great. The story is fleshed out very well. That hits all those nostalgic buttons for the cult classic movie, Big Trouble in Little China, which made the game shine even more. And it's just a nice looking box that looks really good on the shelf. Big Trouble in Little China is a game that I have no regrets that I bought.
Number 2 for me is a game called Anachrony. This is the other game that I bought when I got that gift card that I bought with Alien Artifacts. Anachrony is also a game from 2017. It's a very unique game. It involves time travel. It involves just all sorts of fun stuff. It's worker placement. It's a lot of mechanics that are good for me. This is another one that I think would be great to pull out and play with you guys. I'm guessing none of you guys have played this either.
I've played a couple of rounds of it. Then somebody quit the game and we didn't finish it.
All right. Well, we'll have to rectify that.
So Dave, Anachrony has been on my list of games that I would like to play at some point. It's kind of a big game, and it looks to me like it's maybe just a little bit intimidating. And it's one of those where looking at it, I'm not sure for me personally if, I've had a hard time deciding whether or not I want to buy the game because I'm not sure that the enjoyment will be worth sort of the effort to get into it. And so knowing that you have it and are willing to teach it makes me really happy because I've wanted to try this one for quite a while, actually.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the thing I was talking about originally with like the games that I buy, why I buy them. Same kind of a thing, right? Like I know nobody else has it. Nobody else is probably going to buy it because of that thing that you mentioned. For me, that was also there when I was weighing, which one do I want to buy? That was largely part of it.
So these are the first games that have like diversified from last week's episode. So my number 2 is Dark Tower, because I think mentally is when I decided that I can buy these games and they don't really belong to me and they're okay that they live at other people's houses. I absolutely love Dark Tower. Fantastic game. Andy's family absolutely loves Dark Tower, so he wanted to play it. And he's like, hey, I can buy it from you. And I'm like, why? As long as I play it every once in a while when I come over, like it's going to be the same difference as sitting on my shelf. That's why I'm happy to just contribute to everybody's collections. This is who I play with. It's not like I'm going to sit at home alone and play Dark Tower.
My wife and I were actually talking about that last night, that whole conversation. And you're right. My kids have thoroughly enjoyed that game. And one of my favorite experiences actually with Dark Tower was at DigCon. And we got Doug's oldest son to play, who really doesn't play games. And he had a really fun experience. And it was fun to see him have so much fun when we really don't get to see him at the game table very often.
Yeah, he still talks about that game, and we've had a chance to play it since, and he loves it even more. Absolutely wonderful. I love Return to Dark Tower.
So my number 2 is the Shadows of Brimstone. And when I bought the Shadows of Brimstone, it was in a period of time where I had an insatiable thirst for dungeon crawl games. Not much has changed since then.
I was going to say,
but it's maybe not quite so insatiable. But this looked so cool, so unique with just the theme itself, where there was a Western theme with some horror elements to it and a dungeon crawl where you're going through portals and visiting different dimensions that have completely different rules involved with how that world will interact with the heroes and the leveling up and how you can get so many different abilities to synergize with each other. The whole thing intrigued me. And then the expansions started flowing. And I mean, the expansions started flowing. This game has so much content and has been so fun to start to collect all the expansions and all the enemy packs and the hero packs and another, standalone base game and then another standalone base game. And it was just seeming to be never ending. And so it continues to be one of my favorite games that I've purchased because I continue to purchase expansions for it.
I was going to say, I feel like almost every time I come over to your house for game night, there's a new Shadows of Brimstone expansion sitting on a table somewhere or on a shelf somewhere that either you've recently acquired or that I just haven't seen before. But yeah, that is a huge sprawling game, and it is one that I love as well. Awesome, awesome game.
And I've actually started painting the miniatures for it, which has been equally enjoyable, and it's going to be great to have some painted minis at the table.
Doug, what do you have?
My number 2 is Foundations of Rome. This is another Kickstarter game for me. As I was kind of doing research and trying to decide whether or not I wanted to back this game, I was watching some how to play videos and kind of reading the rule book and trying to decide if it was going to be a good one for my game room. And it quickly became apparent that it was going to be a really fun game. It looked like the kind of game that just seemed like one that would hit with my family, with people I was playing with, and I really wanted on the shelf. However, this is a game that comes in a massive box and is just full of plastic because you build out this huge city of Rome as you play. And it did not come with a cheap price tag. And it was kind of hard for me to get over that barrier. And so it makes my number 2 because I kind of pushed past it and was like, okay, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to back this game. And I went all in. I got the Sundrop wash on it and everything. And I have had just an absolutely incredible time playing and teaching that game ever since it showed up. And one of my favorite things, this has happened a handful of times now, is I've had people over to play games and they're light to mid-weight gamers. And I will go and grab Foundations of Rome and throw it on the table. And just the look of horror in people's eyes as they see this massive box hit the table and are just going, no. What are you trying to do here? This is not what we signed up for. But then pulling the cover off and showing them how it plays and being able to teach and play that game in about an hour's time with light to midweight gamers has just been a real treat for me. And I am so glad it did come with a hefty price tag. It is definitely one of those games that is just ridiculously overproduced, but I am so glad that it sits on my shelf. I'm so glad I backed it and glad that I went ahead and purchased this on Kickstarter.
It's a rare game that plays that quickly and is fairly simple and straightforward that has the table presence that Foundations of Rome has. I mean, you put that thing on the table or you get the trays out for each individual player and you're just like, oh my goodness. And it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful game, especially with the Sundrop that you had purchased with your Kickstarter. It blows me away how beautiful that game is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another fun thing. You hand somebody one of those trays and you're like, here's your tray of buildings. And just to see people kind of light up when they finally kind of grasp what's happening and that you're going to kind of collectively build Rome out on the table. But the gameplay is really quite simple. I mean, you could have done that entire game with cardboard pieces and could have created a much cheaper, not nearly as produced copy of the game. And it would play exactly the same. And I think probably be an enjoyable experience, but it's one of those where the overproduction of it really pushes it over the edge and makes it just a fantastic experience whenever you get it to the table.
Totally. All right, Nate, let us have it. Number 1.
So my number 1 is a game that actually used to be my all-time number 1 game. And it was on that spot for years and years and years. And that's Firefly, the board game. And the reason it's on my number 1 as far as purchase-wise is because of the case. The case that it's in. This is the Broken Token wooden crate. Has the blue sun burned into the top. It's a very nice lined with velvet, has a place for all the pieces, and the game is great, but the presence that this box puts on my shelf is why this is my favorite game that I've bought.
My memories of Firefly, I will always have that game that we played. What was it, National Board Game Day up at Weber State?
Yeah.
Oh, such an epically long game of Firefly. I had to leave, go do homework, come back 3 hours later, and they were still playing. But I mean, overall, Firefly is a fantastic game. We should actually play it because I really enjoy the game.
Yeah, I agree.
Only if we get to also play my number one on this list. My number one is the first game that I spent like a lot of money on. Like 15-ish years ago at Nate's
Totally
game
thought you were
night.
going to say $15.
I so wish I had now. No, but about 15 years ago at game night at the old Meeple Nation HQ before Meeple Nation was born, we all gathered around to play Descent First Edition. I remember riding home with Dennis just in awe at what had just transpired on the table, and I could not wait to play more. I loved it so much that my wife let me go out and spend an awful amount of money to get my own copy and a couple of expansions. It's a game that, like we talked about last week, it and the second edition both are tops for several of us.
Yeah, that was I believe, my first experience with a dungeon crawl.
Same.
And yeah, it was awesome. I loved it.
Logan, what is your number one?
My number one is Nemesis because I felt really good saving it from the coal pile because at the time, Nathan needed money and it was one of those Kickstarters that as soon as it came out, it was super popular. So he could have at least doubled his money if he sold it, but he sold it to me instead. And so I saved it from the pile and I felt really good about that.
I'm glad you saved it too.
My number one, with my number two, I talked about a period of time where I was feverishly trying to acquire dungeon crawl games. And my number one is the reason for that. It's also my favorite game, and that is Descent Second Edition. When I purchased this, I got into the game a little bit later. It wasn't brand new, published. It had been out for quite some time. And so I was feverishly trying to get all the expansions, and they were kind of difficult to get. It was a bit of a treasure hunt to get all the content for Descent Second Edition. So once I finally got it, yeah, it was very satisfying and left me wanting to get into more dungeon crawlers. So that's when Massive Darkness First Edition was added to my shelf. That's when Shadows of Brimstone was added to my shelf. Obviously, we don't get to play those near as much as I would love, but Descent Second Edition, it is one of the games that probably hits my table more often than most, especially those that are campaign games and a little bit longer. I would say multiple times a year, 5 or 6, 7 times a year, we will bust through a game of Descent.
How long did we play that one trial?
That was a long game.
Yeah, it was.
So they have they have campaigns and then they have like adventures or
Yeah.
I think they're adventures. I think that's what they're called in the app. And yes, that was a very, very long game of Descent. It was fun. Yeah, it was like 6 hours.
Yeah, it was like 5 hours in. Doug does some research and impersonates a guy he's never met about, just so you know, before you play this game, know that it will last forever.
Yeah, we played that on New Year's. That was like our big New Year's game. And we kind of sat down thinking like, oh, we'll just play a little Descent. And then like 9 hours later, we were like, wow, that was a really fun game of Descent. Yeah, we had a good time. That was a lot of fun.
All right, Doug, wrap us up.
All right. Well, my number one has been talked about a little bit before. It is Return to Dark Tower. And mostly this holds the number one spot because I honestly just can't really imagine my game room without it. Return to Dark Tower is an absolutely wonderful game. It is rapidly rising as one of my favorite games of all time. It's definitely top 10. Didn't quite make my top 5 that we did last week, but it's up there. It's an absolutely wonderful game. The production is over the top. I love the app integration. The tower is an incredible feat of engineering. Everything about this game I absolutely love. And I am so, so glad that I purchased it and so glad that I have it on the shelf.
I'm really happy Nathan told me to back this game.
Me too.
I mean, literally, that's how it happened in the cast because, like, I wasn't around in the 80s to play the original version. I had no nostalgia for it. He's like, no, this is a really good one. You should back this if you get a chance. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I hope that they come out with some more content for the app because it would be super easy to roll that out. You're right. The app is integrated so well. In fact, I think it's one of the best implementations of an application for a game. And just the interaction with how it works with the tower and the combat, everything. I think it's so well done. And, like we talked about earlier in the cast, it's one that my kids, my youngest boy in particular, still talks about our plays of that and is constantly pestering me to get it to the table. Let's play Dark Tower. Let's play Dark Tower. It's one I never mind busting out and getting a play in.
Yeah, in fact, at one of your game nights just recently, our good friend James Clark was over. He usually doesn't come to that game night, but he had showed up that night and he's like, I really want to try Dark Tower. So he and young Logan, not our Logan here, but our friend young Logan, they sat down and played a game of this and absolutely had a wonderful time. And I remember we were playing a game on the other table and they kept kind of asking questions and giving us updates on how the game was going. And I was like, these two are going to lose this game horribly. I just kept thinking, man, this game is going to end in disaster for them. And then it was so cool that they pulled it off. They were able to finagle things in just such a way. They kind of coaxed the main bad out of the tower through some pretty incredible strategy and play, were able to defeat him. And they were just beside themselves, happy that they had pulled off the W there. Always a good experience to get Return to Dark Tower to the table.
Doug, you should also mention that it was like one of the most difficult nemesis that they were up against.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, so it wasn't even just that they were struggling with the game in general. Like, no, like I believe when we were discussing at the other table, Andy's like, oh yeah, we fought that guy and lost hard.
We did. Yep. I was part of that game and we did lose. So I that's why I thought they were going to lose for sure. But no, it's really exciting. The game provides a lot of those moments of excitement as you defeat bad guys and complete quests. I know that all of us could sit here and talk for a long time about Return to Dark Tower, but that's why it's number one.
And unfortunately, that brings us to our close.
Those are our top 5 games that we are so glad we bought. Until next time.
We'll see you standing in the checkout line, getting your next best purchase.
Thank you for listening and being a part of Meeple Nation. If you would be so kind as to follow, subscribe, share, and rate or review this podcast, it really helps to spread the fun. You can be more involved in supporting the podcast by joining the nation at patreon.com/MeepleNation, or you can find a link at the top of our webpage, meeplenation.com. And while you're there, look at all our extra content. There are links to all our past episodes, a wide variety of blogs, pictures from our Instagram feed, and bios for all the hosts and our awesome bloggers. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all under Meeple Nation. If you would like to chat with the hosts or other members of the nation, you can join our Facebook group, Meeple Nation Off Air. We hope to see you again at a game night, a con, or maybe a suspense-driven evening of Werewolf. Thank you for listening and supporting Meeple Nation, and stay tuned for next week's episode.
Thank you so much for listening. We very much want to thank our patrons who help keep the podcast running. I personally want to thank my co-hosts for all the help they provide with both content here on the podcast, in addition to what we have available on our website. Without them, the podcast would not happen. If you too would like to support the podcast, you can join the nation at patreon.com/Meeple_nation. Or you can find a link to Patreon at the top of our webpage, meeplenation.com. If you have any questions, comments, or games you feel should be on our radar, you can always reach us at meeplenation@gmail.com. We can't wait to hear from you. I am grateful to Doug and Andy who helped me edit episodes, and I want to thank James and Kim Clark who do the editing on our blogs and on our webpage, which can be found at meeplenation.com. We want to thank Brain Detergent for our music. If you want to find more from him, you can follow his links that can be found on our webpage, or simply search for Brain Detergent on YouTube to find more of his tracks. Thank you again for listening and being part of the Meeple Nation community. The top 5 games that I bought. The top 5 games that I purchased. My purchase top 5 games.
Go again.
The top 5 games I have bought.
Do it 5 times.
top 5 games I have bought, the 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 top 5 games I have bought in one breath.
Good job.